Reserve is continuing to put their foot on the gas pedal when it comes to raising interest rates. And that means more Americans are dealing with the financial headaches associated with the high cost of borrowing. Look, that's terrible enough for those who need to finance basic necessities like housing, food, or transportation. And consumer debt is already at an all-time high, which is a testament to just how little Trump's $2 trillion tax cuts for the rich trickled down on us. But there are growing concerns regarding subprime loans in the auto industry, which could translate to borrowers finding themselves unable to cover their monthly car payments. In order to fully understand the gravity of this issue, we need to dive into the numbers and see just how much car debt Americans have racked up over the years. When the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates in response to the economic collapse of 2008, which made it far cheaper to borrow, Americans took on greater amounts of debt in order to buy cars. In 2000, Americans had less than $600 billion in motor vehicle loans outstanding, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. By the third quarter of 2022, Americans owed just shy of $1.4 trillion on car and SUV debt, a full doubling in barely a decade. Soon Americans started taking out pricier car loans that could be paid off in a longer period of time, which is not a good thing. For example, according to Edmunds, in 2010, the average auto loan was around $26,000. But that figure jumped to $32,000 by 2019. And while it was far more common to finance cars with 5-year terms back in the day, Americans started signing up for 6-year terms even before the pandemic. Some loans today have terms as long as 9 years, believe it or not. And I know what you're all thinking. Obviously, Americans started borrowing more for their cars due to inflationary pressures. The price of vehicles likely rose over the years, right? But believe it or not, that wasn't the case until the pandemic squeezed the supply of available vehicles. From the mid-1990s until 2010, the price of a new vehicle remained flat. After 2010, the price rose by about 8% in total until 2020. So as with many facets of society, the pandemic disrupted and changed things. The shortage of car parts and semiconductors severely limited the supply of cars, and the Fed's ongoing fiscal policy of low interest rates, meaning cheap money, drove car prices way up. The price of new cars rose 20% between 2020 and November of 2022, the sharpest increase on record. The average price is now pushing $50,000. The price of used cars rose by an even steeper 56% through early mid-2022, another record. Things started to change, but not necessarily for the better. Since the beginning of 2022, the central bank reversed course on easy money and began raising interest rates to tamp down on inflation. That means that the cost of borrowing for a car has gone up significantly. The average auto loan interest rate was 5.66% in March of 2022. But by March of this year, the average cost of borrowing rose to nearly 9%.
At this data, which we received from Edmunds. We asked them to crunch the numbers in terms of how many people, what they're buying, what they're financing. Now here's the average in the third quarter. Financing a little over 41 grand, average rate just under 6%. And the average new car monthly payment on a loan was $703. Well, look what's happened in the last year and a half. The percentage of new vehicle buyers who are financing their auto loan with a payment of at least $1,000 a month, it's gone from 6% all the way up to 14% in September, 14.3% to be exact.
But for some, a $700 monthly car payment is actually a bargain. Get a load of what the owner of Scott Adams Toyota, which is located just outside of Kansas City, says about what he's personally experiencing at his own dealership.
What we've noticed, especially here in the last 45 days with the Federal Reserve raising rates, that at least 50% of our customers are having payments over $1,000 a month. When you include sales tax and sometimes property tax, it's even more than that. So it's at least 50% of the cars and trucks that we are selling.
And these astronomical car payments are causing some pretty serious issues. We're already starting to see the impact of these unaffordable loans. According to CNBC's reporting, while borrowers who are behind on their payments by more than 60 days represent a tiny portion of all outstanding auto loans at 1.84%, their ranks are growing, according to a recent report from Cox Automotive. The share was 26.7% higher in December than the year earlier and is largely concentrated among borrowers with low credit scores. And look, this is what I'm worried about. This might just be the tip of the iceberg because some percentage of these outstanding loans are subprime and have rates that adjust along with the Federal Reserve's benchmark interest rate. 8 years ago, the New York Times reported on how banks and private equity firms fueled a boom in subprime auto loans to the most vulnerable car buyers. They wrote at the time that the New York Times had examined more than 100 bankruptcy court cases, dozens of civil lawsuits against lenders, and hundreds of loan documents, and found that subprime auto loans can come with interest rates that can exceed 23%. And they profiled some people like Rodney Durham. Rodney Durham stopped working in 1991, declared bankruptcy, and lives on Social Security. Nonetheless, Wells Fargo lent him $15,197 to buy a used Mitsubishi sedan. Durham's application said that he made $35,000 as a technician at Lourdes Hospital in New York, according to a copy of the loan document. But he says he told the dealer he hadn't worked at the hospital for more than 3 decades. Now, after months of Wells Fargo pressing him over missed payments, the bank has repossessed his car. Durham is one of millions of Americans with, unfortunately, bad credit. And these are the people who were easily obtaining auto loans from used car dealers, including some who fabricate or ignore borrowers' abilities to pay. And the real question is how many of these subprime car loans exist? And how are these Americans making ends meet with rising interest rates that are making their loans way more expensive and difficult to pay on time? The problem is state and federal lawmakers allow banks and private equity firms to prey on working Americans. But once there's an economic hiccup, like pandemic-induced inflation, these Americans are on their own. That's what happened with Americans who lost their homes, who were foreclosed on as a result of predatory subprime mortgages during the 2008 collapse. And it's likely the same will happen again, only this time with cars. And keep in mind that cars lose value the second the buyer drives it off the lot. So even if the borrower tries to sell the car, it's very likely that they're underwater and owe more than what the car is worth. It's just one economic calamity after the next, after the other. And it's so incredibly frustrating because all of these pressures add up. We're all in this pressure cooker. And I think that explains a lot of the political violence we see in the country. A lot of the anger that Americans feel gets redirected or misguided toward whatever imaginary scapegoats politicians want to direct them toward. And my heart breaks for these people. I mean, again, the New York Times reported on these subprime auto loans 8 years ago, and nothing's really changed. And we're starting to see people default on their car loans. And I gotta be honest, if people have $1,000 to pay every month just for their cars, I think the numbers that we're currently experiencing with auto loan defaults is only going to increase. And when these banks need help because a huge portion of their clientele is now defaulting on loans that they have signed off on, are they gonna ask for help from the federal government? We'll see how it plays out. But this is a story that I think will explode in coming months.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.